would make it football. It's good for you and Kate for a prediction video today. I'll be doing the Tennessee Volunteers. So Tennessee has a very tough schedule, in my opinion. And even though the conference schedule is the same as last year, with all that Tennessee loses on their roster, I think it's unlikely that they'll be able to make it back to the college football playoff this year. I'd say 10-2 is their ceiling, but I could also see them only going 8-4. But while a non-conference schedule is not what I would consider to be hard, because they do get to play three little teams: East Tennessee State, UAB, and New Mexico State, which will be guaranteed wins. They don't have it quite as easy, probably, as they did last year, because last year they played three little teams and NC State, who turned out to be a terrible team. And this year they play Syracuse, who was a good team last year. So with the game being played in Atlanta, Georgia, it will be played up much closer to Tennessee than to Syracuse. And while I think this could be a competitive game, I would be surprised if Tennessee were to lose this one, because Tennessee has a big talent advantage over Syracuse. And Syracuse is a team that I think was probably not quite as good as you would think they were from looking at their record last season. Because Syracuse, even though they were 10-3 overall and 9-3 in the regular season, they were 7-2 in close games. So they would have only won three games if they would have lost all their close games. And Kyle McCord, I think, was why they did so well in close games last year. And with him being gone this year, and with teams that usually doing the opposite of the year before in close games, I think Syracuse is probably going to have a pretty big drop off this season. But having to play Georgia to begin the conference schedule couldn't really get much tougher. Not only has Josh Heupel's offense struggled to even move the ball on Georgia every time, with Tennessee losing Dylan Sampson at running back, they're going to have to hope that Nico, I'm about to leave you, is better this year, and that Gunnar Stockton doesn't turn out to be good for Georgia. Because if it hadn't been for Dylan Sampson, Tennessee's offense would have been bad last year. He really carried their offense, because if I was a Tennessee fan, I would have been disappointed in Nico, I'm about to leave you, and their wide receivers. Without Dylan Sampson, Tennessee wouldn't have gotten the opportunity to get blown out in the college football playoff. But I would consider Tennessee to be a top 10 toughest place to play. So them getting that game at home will give them a better chance. And I know you might not think that looking at where their first bye week comes between Mississippi State and Arkansas would come at a very good time, but I actually think it comes at a pretty good time, because Arkansas, even though they're not a very good team, they upset Tennessee last year. And in the conference, while I wouldn't say Tennessee has any guaranteed wins, I'd say the games against Mississippi State and Vanderbilt are about as close to guaranteed wins for them as it gets. But I think it's going to be very unlikely for Tennessee to come out of the Arkansas, Alabama, Kentucky, Oklahoma 4 in a row at 4-0. and I think there's a good chance that they could go 2-2 in those. And It's really not good having to play two road games in a row against Alabama and Kentucky. Alabama, even though Tennessee has beat them 2 out of the last 3 years, they've owned Tennessee because they've beat them 16 out of the last 18 years. Tennessee has not won in Tuscaloosa since the year I was born, 2003. And Alabama and Kentucky and Georgia are the three most physical teams in the SEC. Now, that obviously doesn't mean they're the three best teams, but physical just means that they focus more on the line of scrimmage than the average team does. And Kentucky, while they don't get the talented linemen that Alabama and Georgia do, Mark Stoops tries to win games just by winning the battle at the line of scrimmage because Kentucky rarely has better than average at any of the other positions. But the problem for Kentucky last year was even if you are good at the line of scrimmage, you've got to have a quarterback that can throw a 10-yard pass, which they didn't have last year. But I wouldn't consider Kentucky to have a huge home field advantage. And good news for Tennessee is they've owned Kentucky. They've beat them 37 times in the last 40 years. But Tennessee having to play a very talented Oklahoma team right after those two in a row. I think is going to be tough because I think Tennessee's probably going to be beat up from playing at Alabama and Kentucky in a row. But I wouldn't say that their second bye week comes at a good time because it comes right before New Mexico State, a horrible team. It is good that they'll get pretty much two bye weeks to prepare for what I think is going to be a really tough road game against Florida. Because looking at the history of this game, Florida is at 17-3 in the last 20 years against Tennessee, and even when Tennessee has beat them, they've still struggled. Like in 2022, Tennessee had a much better team than Florida did, and they beat them by only 5 points. And in 2024, Tennessee had a much better team than Florida did, and they had to come from behind to beat them in overtime. And Tennessee has not won in Gainesville, Florida since 2003. And comparing rosters right now between Tennessee and Florida, I'm not convinced Tennessee is going to be a much better team than Florida. I do think they'll be better than Florida, and I think Josh Heupel is a much better coach than Billy Napier is. But I'll go ahead and say if Tennessee does not beat Florida, they're not going to the college football playoff. But now for the point spread prediction. Games in the green are games where I think Tennessee will be favored to win by a blowout, 20 or more points. There's three of those: East Tennessee State, UAB, and New Mexico State. And games in the blue are games where I think Tennessee will be favored to win by double digits, 10 to 19 points, and there's three of those: Mississippi State, Kentucky, and Vanderbilt. Games in the purple are games where I think they'll be favored to win by about a touchdown, 6 to 9 points, and there's two of those: Arkansas and Oklahoma. Games in the gray are games where I think Tennessee will be about a field goal underdog, 1 to 5 points, and there's two of those, Alabama and Florida. Games in the yellow are games where I think that Tennessee will be an underdog by about a touchdown, 6 to 9 points, and there's one of those at Georgia. So East Tennessee State, Tennessee should be favored in that one by about 50 points or even more. And UAB and New Mexico State, uh, Tennessee should be favored in both of those by about 40 points. And Syracuse, Tennessee should be favored in that one by 8 or 9 points. And Arkansas, I'll say Tennessee will be favored by 7 points, but that would be in the pink, which means they'd be favored by about a field goal if it was a road game. And Oklahoma, that'd be in the pink if it was on the road, but because it's at home, I'll say Tennessee will be favored by 7 points. And Georgia, I think Tennessee will be an underdog by, I'll say, 7 points. And Mississippi State, that one's really about as close to the green as it gets. The spread in that one might be at 19 points. And Kentucky, I think Tennessee will be favored by about 10 in that one. But when it comes time to it, it wouldn't be surprising if that one ended up being in the purple. And Vanderbilt, I think Tennessee will be favored by maybe 13 points. And Alabama, I think, will be about a 3 point favorite over Tennessee. But Tennessee would probably be favored in that one if it was at home. And Florida, that one's in the gray because it's on the road and the history of the game. I think Florida will be favored by about a point in that one. So that will be it with this video. Please subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.